Dear, a young Afri, but the shock, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. Yet the real shock was still ahead. Just days later, Marcus, a 26-year-old burdened with family responsibilities and crushed under debt, would make a decision no one could have predicted. A decision that would send this story in a direction no one could foresee. And that, my friends, was only the beginning. Marcus Reed was only 26 then, but his eyes carried the weariness of someone who had weathered too many storms. His father, Samuel Reed, had died suddenly from COVID-19 complications, a loss that not only shattered the family's hearts, but also swept away their sole breadwinner. His mother, Lorraine, was battling diabetes and high blood pressure illnesses that required long-term expensive treatment. His younger sister, Naomi, was in her final year at Howard University with tuition books and living expenses far beyond the family's means. Since his father's death, Marcus had taken on every responsibility. By day, he drove for food delivery and ride-hailing services. By night, he worked security at a downtown office building. On weekends, he took construction shifts. A full night's sleep had become a rare luxury. Debt from high-interest loans piled up, collection calls never stopped, sometimes accompanied by legal threats. Each month, scraping together enough for his mother's medicine, Naomi's tuition rent, and a bit of cheap food was a constant battle. On those young shoulders was the weight of an entire family, and in those days when it felt like the walls were closing in, fate brought Marcus to a meeting he never could have imagined. It was a sweltering early summer afternoon in Chicago. Marcus had just finished his last delivery shift and stopped by a small soul food diner on the corner where the smell of fried chicken and macaroni and cheese always helped him forget his fatigue for a while. He stood at the counter, flipping through crumpled bills in his wallet, calculating whether he could afford a proper meal. At that moment, a gaze through the dark-tinted glass met his. Outside, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom sat still. In the back seat, a woman was watching him with an expression of curiosity and concern. When the door opened, she stepped out with such confident poise that the air around the diner seemed to shift. Eleanor Whitmore, a name that commanded respect from anyone in the American business world. She was the chairwoman of Whitmore Global, an empire spanning real estate, logistics, technology, and entertainment. Her haute couture dress, glittering diamond necklace, and commanding presence made diners either nod respectfully or avoid her gaze altogether. She walked straight toward Marcus, smiling with deliberate intent. "You're Marcus Reed, aren't you?" Her voice carried the soft cadence of the South, but with an undeniable authority. Marcus blinked in surprise. "Yes. But how do you know my name?" Her eyes scanned his face before she answered slowly. "I know more than that. I know your mother needs treatment, your sister's running out of money for school, and you're exhausting yourself to keep your family afloat. Marcus, if you want, I can change your life completely. With just one condition. That condition, like a bolt of lightning, would open a path no one could have predicted." Eleanor's offer rang out on the noisy street, yet everything around Marcus seemed to fall silent. "Marry me," she said clearly, slowly, "and I'll cover your mother's treatment at the best hospitals. I'll pay all your sister's tuition and guarantee her a prestigious job after graduation. I'll wipe out your debts and bring you into a life you've never imagined." Marcus froze. Part of him wanted to scoff at the absurdity, but the other part, the one crushed under unpaid bills and collection calls, saw this as the only lifeline in raging waters. Without another word, Eleanor handed him a glossy black business card with gold-embossed lettering. "Think about it, Marcus. Opportunities don't come twice." She turned and stepped into the Rolls-Royce, the convoy vanishing around the corner, leaving him at the intersection, unsure whether this was fortune or a trap. 2 days later, the pressure hit breaking point. Creditors appeared at his apartment door threatening to seize belongings. The hospital warned they would halt his mother's treatment without payment. Naomi called in tears, saying she might be suspended from school. That night, Marcus looked at the card again. His hand trembled as he dialed the number. Just 48 hours later, the wedding took place at Los Angeles City Hall, witnessed by politicians and business elites. From the moment he stepped through the gates of the Whitmore estate in Bel Air, Marcus knew he had entered an entirely different world. The Whitmore mansion in Bel Air looked like a palace from the most extravagant dreams. Italian marble floors, warm French crystal chandeliers, oil paintings worth millions lining the walls. The staff, mostly beautiful young women from around the world, moved silently attending to needs Marcus hadn't even voiced. What struck him most was the reverence mixed with caution everyone showed Eleanor. Even those who had worked for her over 2 decades still called her Mrs. Whitmore and avoided eye contact unless permitted. Within days, Marcus noticed something strange on the second floor was a thick wooden door with multiple advanced electronic locks guarded 24/7. No one but Eleanor was allowed in. Whenever he asked, the answer was, "That area is for the lady of the house only." His relationship with Eleanor remained polite but distant. They dined together nightly, fine china before them, exquisite dishes served in silence. They rarely spoke of personal matters, more like strangers sharing a roof. Occasionally, in Eleanor's gaze, Marcus caught an enigmatic glint. One night, passing the restricted area, he heard her speaking on the phone. Her voice didn't sound like that of a woman near 90. It was youthful, emotional, almost passionate. He knew then that whatever was behind that door held the answers to everything he didn't understand about their marriage. And he would find a way in, no matter the cost. The opportunity came on a rainy afternoon when Eleanor was preparing for a private flight to New York for a board meeting. Marcus happened to run into Layla Brooks, her personal assistant in the library. Unlike the other staff, Layla was young, energetic, and a bit more open. Marcus approached her, feigning casual conversation about Eleanor's schedule, then asked quietly, "If I wanted to spend some private time with my wife, how would I go about it? I don't want to break any house rules." Layla looked surprised for a moment, then a flicker of amusement lit her eyes. "Actually, Mrs. Whitmore has mentioned you quite a few times. She'd be very happy if you took the initiative." A few minutes later, Layla returned with a mysterious smile. "She says you can come to her private room tonight at 10. Marcus knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. He braced himself, though he had no idea what he would find: a secret, a confession, or something entirely different. At exactly 10 p.m., he stood before the door that had always been closed to everyone else. When it opened, Marcus froze. Eleanor was no longer the commanding figure he saw in the daytime. She wore pearl-colored silk loungewear, her hair loose, her skin glowing softly in candlelight. Her voice was gentle, almost melodic, like a light jazz tune. "Marcus, I've been waiting for this moment since the day we married." The room was filled with the delicate scent of perfume bathed in warm golden light. The formal distance between them dissolved. For the first time, Marcus saw an Eleanor who was not Mrs. Whitmore the Queen, but a woman yearning to be understood. Marcus sat down on the velvet sofa, Eleanor leaning slightly toward him, her eyes shining with a light he had never seen before. She spoke slowly, each word carefully chosen. "Age, Marcus, is just a number. When a woman truly loves, her soul becomes immortal. I don't just want to make you heir to my wealth and power. I'm putting my heart in your hands." Marcus swallowed hard. He had entered this room full of suspicion and questions, yet the sincerity and vulnerability in her voice made him hesitate. Eleanor's tone deepened. "I've lived long enough to know that most people who come to me see only money, power, or age. But you're different. You see me as a person, and that is rare." Marcus exhaled slowly, honest in his reply. "I won't pretend I wasn't driven by circumstances when I agreed to marry you. But tonight here, I realize there's a lot about you I don't know." Eleanor's eyes glistened, a fleeting fragility appearing. "I've loved, I've lost, and I still hope. I just want someone to touch my heart, not for fame or fortune." In the stillness, broken only by soft jazz, Marcus felt her heart beat as she rested her hand on his chest, steady, warm. It was nothing like the cold, silent dinners they had shared in the grand dining room. That night, an invisible thread connected two people who had seemed worlds apart, but beneath this newfound bond, Marcus hadn't forgotten. The locked door upstairs. 3 days later, Eleanor had to fly urgently to New York for a critical shareholders' meeting. The Whitmore estate was quieter than ever. Many staff were sent home, leaving only a few gardeners and minimal security. Marcus knew this was the chance he'd been waiting for. His footsteps were hushed on the gleaming wooden floors as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. His heart pounded. The heavy wooden door with its array of electronic locks, the one he had passed so many times without being allowed to touch, was now slightly ajar. He drew a deep breath and pushed it open. Inside was a large room bathed in soft golden light. The walls were covered with old photographs, frame upon frame, telling a story spanning decades. Marcus approached the grand table in the center. His eyes stopped at one photo immediately. In it, a young, radiant Eleanor stood beside a man. His father, Samuel Reed. They didn't just know each other. The look in their eyes spoke louder than any words they had been in love. His hands trembled as he picked up more photos, the two of them at events, on trips, in intimate moments no one else would have known. Beside them were handwritten love letters, promises, even plans for a future that had never come to be. Marcus was still reeling when a calm voice spoke behind him. "So, you finally found out." He turned. Eleanor stood there, not surprised in the slightest. In her eyes, there was no anger, only a waiting that seemed to have lasted for decades. Marcus stood frozen, the photographs shaking in his hands. His throat was dry as he croaked, You knew my father." Eleanor stepped slowly into the room, gently closing the door behind her. "Not just knew him," she said, her voice low, but firm. "I loved him more than anyone in my life." Marcus frowned, a wave of disbelief washing over him. "So, this marriage was because of that?" She met his gaze, her eyes carrying 40 years of pent-up emotion. "At first, yes. When he refused me, it wasn't because I wasn't good enough, but because he feared the public. Feared people would say he was a gold digger because I was older. The way he walked away, it broke me. From that day, I swore, if I couldn't have Samuel Reed, I would have his bloodline." Marcus felt as if the ground had been ripped from beneath him. Her words cut deep. "So, you exploited my family's situation, just for revenge." Eleanor didn't flinch. "I watched you for years, waiting for the moment you were most desperate. Everything, the offer, the wedding, the distance was part of the plan. I wanted you completely dependent on me, and one day, I would tell you the truth so you'd hurt as I once did." She paused, stepping toward the table, her fingers brushing the photograph of herself and Samuel. But her voice shifted softer. "But you did something I didn't expect. You treated me with respect and kindness I had forgotten existed. Marcus, you shattered 40 years of bitterness simply by being decent. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm no longer the one holding you prisoner. Now, I'm the one imprisoned by feelings I thought had died long ago. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. In that instant between betrayal and compassion, he knew his response would change everything. Marcus was silent for a long time. Memories of sleepless nights, unpaid bills, his mother's labored breathing, all tangled with the image of the woman before him who had once sought to use him for vengeance, but now stood with tear-filled eyes and a trembling voice. Finally, he stepped toward her. Eleanor, I won't deny that I feel betrayed, but I also see something else in you, a heart that's been deeply wounded. People with scars often hurt others, but you chose to stop. That's why I can forgive you. She shook her head slightly, tears spilling onto her clenched hand. You can truly forgive me after all those lies and schemes. Marcus took her hand gently, his gaze steady. What matters isn't how we started, but how we choose to continue. You could have held on to the hate, but you chose love. That takes more courage than revenge. Eleanor broke down, no longer the proud Queen Whitmore, but a woman who had once loved passionately and lost, now finding a fragment of peace again. From that day, the distance between them dissolved. Eleanor began sharing with Marcus how she had built the Whitmore empire from a small diner in Alabama to a global force, and the battles she fought against gender bias and racial prejudice. Marcus shared his dream of starting his own business, his hopes for Naomi to graduate, and his fear of failing to protect his family. Two people who had begun with a cold contract now sat together as confidants, listening and truly understanding one another. That winter, Eleanor began to weaken. At first it was only fleeting fatigue, but soon it became days where she barely left her room. Marcus arranged for the best doctors from New York and Los Angeles to care for her, but her condition didn't improve. In her final weeks, Eleanor spent most of her time in her private room, but this time the door remained open. Marcus often sat by her bed listening to stories she had never shared with anyone, her first business trips to Europe, the times she was turned down simply for being a Black woman, and the days she felt utterly alone in her lavish rooms. One afternoon, as pale sunlight streamed through the window, she gripped his hand tightly. Marcus, I have no regrets. You healed 40 years of bitterness in me. Now I can leave with peace and faith that forgiveness is real. Marcus felt his eyes burn. He could only say, You've taught me that love can be stronger than hate, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. A few days later, Eleanor passed away peacefully. Her funeral became a major event in the business world, where people spoke not only of a legendary entrepreneur, but also of the moving story between her and the young man who had entered her life as part of a contract and stayed as family. At the service, Marcus stood before the crowd holding a photo of her in her youth, Eleanor. I forgive you, and I hope you forgive yourself. In the end, your love was real. After Eleanor's passing, it took Marcus weeks to adjust to the emptiness in the mansion once filled with the footsteps of a woman who had been both his wife and the person who changed his life forever. Layla Brooks, Eleanor's loyal assistant, remained to help Marcus manage Whitmore Global. Long nights reviewing contracts and standing together under the pressure of the board forged a quiet but deep connection between them. A year later, they were married in the garden where Eleanor had once planted white roses. When Marcus placed the ring on Layla's finger, he glanced up at the large portrait of Eleanor hanging on the second-floor balcony. The afternoon light made it seem as if her eyes were watching over them. After the ceremony, Marcus entered Eleanor's room preserved exactly as she had left it. He opened a desk drawer to find an old envelope on which was written, "Open when you're ready." Inside was a letter in her familiar handwriting. "Marcus, if you are reading this, it means you found a reason to live for more than yourself. I used pain to bind you, but you used love to set me free. Don't let my story die with me. Turn it into a reminder that true love is always stronger than any scheme. You are proof that people can change, even when it's late." Marcus held the paper tightly, his eyes burning with resolve. He decided to turn Eleanor's legacy into the Whitmore Foundation, a fund supporting thousands of Black families across America. At the inauguration, before hundreds of guests and media, Marcus stood at the podium, his voice strong. "Eleanor Whitmore once sought to destroy my life with hatred. But she's the one who taught me that forgiveness is the truest strength. From today, every family this foundation helps is part of that story. And this is how I will keep her alive." Applause thundered. In that moment, Marcus looked up at the Bel Air sky where the last rays of daylight pierced the clouds and shone straight into Eleanor's window. He smiled, knowing that somewhere she was smiling back at him.